Thank you very much, Martin, for the introduction and for organising this session. I'm Iseult Lynch from the University of Birmingham, and it's my very great pleasure to be here this morning to talk as part of our online Jaqpot Hackathon to talk about electronic laboratory notebooks. So all of us who are involved in experimental work are very familiar with the process of keeping a lab notebook and how important it is to document our experimental work and to write down the details of our experiments and our observations. But now that we're moving towards more complicated experiments, larger and larger sets of data, more and more characterization of our nanomaterials, and a realization that in order to make our data reusable, we need large amounts of metadata. This is becoming now a challenge to record all of that in a paper format, and thus there's a strong push towards the use of electronic laboratory notebooks. But of course, many of us are still working on paper.
But we are still using notebooks in the paper sense most generally. And what that leads to then is the poor data management leads to significant loss of data and metadata. So lots of us have things on our computer, but it's not available to others. It also decreases the quality of the data and scientific publications, because how many times has it happened that the original data got lost, or the file got corrupted, or you can't find the calibration that went with it, or all sorts of things that generally lead to lower quality. Significant insights can get lost, and then it is difficult to further exploit that data. So it's not suitable really then for use in machine learning or artificial intelligence. So what is an electronic lab notebook? It is basically, as the little figure there shows, a computer program that does the job of the lab notebook. It's used to manage scientific workflows, and it covers the entire data lifecycle and stores both data and metadata. And those words that are in bold there are because I'll talk a little bit more about them in a moment. And it's worth remembering, of course, that like the paper version of your lab notebook, lab notebooks are legal documents. They are used in demonstrating inventions and that you were the first to do something or document something. So they are a really important part of the scientific process. And then some of the advantages of using an electronic lab notebook over a paper notebook is that it's much easier to search within. So you can search for specific data, for protocols, for calibration information, for specific chemicals, etc. It should simplify data copying and the backup of your data, and it should support collaboration amongst users. So the data lifecycle and metadata, I've mentioned these, and here I'm going to try and be a little bit more specific about them. So the data lifecycle expands from the planning of your experiment, where you're sort of thinking through what you're going to do, what your design is going to be, what your replicates are going to be, your exposure time, your concentrations, etc., through the actual running of the experiment and the acquisition of data. Then you have the manipulation of that data. So whether you're doing any organizing of it, whether you're dividing it by the controls, subtracting blanks, etc. The analysis then is where you actually process that data and maybe generate the EC50 or other outputs from it. And then the part that we often forget about then is the long-term storage of that data and how we make the data fair and shared. So fair, of course, is findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. And it is not quite the same as open, but it's a step towards open. And then on the outside of this, you'll start to see that we have started to indicate two other pieces of the puzzle. So the first box outside each of these describes the metadata, and metadata is the data about the data. So for each of these, there's different pieces of metadata that we need to include. And these can be descriptive metadata, so describing the experiment, so the assay type, the cell line, the concentrations, the calibration, the specific instruments, etc. Then we get into the technical metadata, which is maybe the statistical approaches that were used, if there was any data cleaning or any gap filling, etc. And then the final part is the bibliographic metadata. So this is sort of the who generated the data, where it was generated, when, and then as part of the linking of it, so if it's published, and very importantly then the licensing information. And then the final piece outside each of these is the who's responsible. So who is responsible for providing the metadata. And for the descriptive ones, it's definitely the data creators, because they're the ones who'll know about it. So the person who is in the lab doing the experiment. As we start to get to the analysis and the manipulation, it's usually still the data creators, but sometimes now we also have analysts. So this could be where we start to integrate some of our computational colleagues, and then the curators who are maybe helping or responsible to get it into a format for databases and for modeling. And it could be that the data creator has all of these roles, or it could be that they're shared. And then the final ones start to become the responsibility then of the data curators and the database managers. So some of the aspects of making data fair are very much on the database you put it in. And all of this is described in a paper that we're just about to submit to the nanomaterials, so you can have much more detail about it shortly. Sorry, I can't remember now how I got it to move forward. There we go. Okay, I'm going to speed up because I'm conscious of time. So the other important aspect of all of this is, as an experimentalist, you need to have a data management plan. And that's really a way of describing how you're collecting your data, what kind of data you're generating, all of the ethics, legal and security issues around it, how you're going to store and preserve it, and how you're going to share it and reuse it. And again, here I just wanted to flag up that the NanoCommons data management plan is publicly available and everyone is free to use it. Our next version is coming very shortly, so hopefully during the summer, which will describe specific examples of how we manage the different types of data, so experimental data, computational data, and literature curated data. So in terms then of the electronic lab notebooks themselves, there are multiple suppliers of them, of these computer programs. I came across this link, which you can have a look at, which actually was at the end of last year, an analysis of all of the different available electronic lab notebooks, and they were ranked by Labs Explorer according to criteria of user friendliness, completeness, connectivity, so connecting to equipment and to other software, to price, and then to some special bonuses if they had features that the Lab Explorers people really liked. The one that we have used the most, and that I'll talk about in the rest of this short presentation, is SciNote, which was ranked 3rd here, mostly because it's got a free plan, but also because their API is open and we can link to it, or we're working with them to link to it. So what is the SciNotebook then? How do we use it? So basically it allows us to set up a whole workflow for the whole data management. So we can set up initially our experimental design and protocols, so we can pull in our existing protocols. Then we can set up all of the samples and endpoints that we want. So again, if we have a unique identifier for each nanomaterial that we're working with, and then we make our list, we can set up our experimental workflows, then acquire our data into a fixed and predefined template, and then do the curation and annotation. This is then just a slightly closer look at each of them. So in terms of the experimental workflow, we can have multi-branched experiments. So you can have, for example, details of how you store your stock solution, then how you prepare your samples for different, so for TEM or for DLS or for UV-Vis, for example, and then you have the actual protocol for each of those endpoints and so on. So you can have multiple branches from your Excel sheets, etc. So then the data acquisition and management, again, you can set up all of your protocols, and you can pull them in from the existing formats that you have them in. So this one is DLS characterization, and I see Tassos there, so I should just thank him that he has been the one doing a large amount or the majority of the work on implementing the electronic lab notebooks for our own group, and most of that learning is then what's translating forward for NanoCommons. And then the data acquisition, as I said, you can set it up to capture the specific endpoints that you want, and ideally we're linking those to the existing ontology terms. So linking to the ENAN and mapper ontology in large part, and that then also means that the data is organized in the way you want it. And then finally, you can link it then to the data curation templates, and enables you to email directly then the data sets into your repository. So we are currently working with SciNote to have a deeper integration with them directly to the NanoCommons knowledge base, which Dieter is going to talk about shortly. But really it does simplify the process and enable you to track materials, to link the properties of specific materials back to the material. We can also do things like looking at how particles age over time, so during storage or under different conditions. We've also used it, for example, in round-robin experiments, so interlaboratory comparisons. In the ACE Nano project, we use them as a case study, for example. So that's really all I'm going to say, other than to end with saying that we, as NanoCommons, we have an offer in terms of transnational access. So we can help you to set up electronic lab notebooks for your experimental workflows. And I've just put a couple of the links here. So that's the link directly to applying for transnational access. So the electronic lab notebooks come under the experimental workflows, but we also have a whole range of other services that you can have a look at. And if you're not quite sure what you want, we also have a help desk that you can contact to have a first discussion about what you might want to do. So that's it.